It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life, from the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous and not so famous, the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Okay, please welcome back to the Douglas Coleman Show, Emil Rem. Hi, Emil. How are you?
Great. Thank you. Depends on what you're going to ask me.
Well, it won't be anything that you can't answer, I don't think.
Well, I'm getting old, so you got to be gentle with me.
I'll do my best. We looked it up, and you were on the show the last time you were here was June of 2024, and I remember talking to you about your book, which was really interesting, that you basically traveled alone as a kid and went to all different kinds of places and had a rather interesting upbringing. And that book, that was the Vanishing Gardens?
That's right, The Vanished Gardens of Cordoba.
Of Cordoba, okay, all right. Now, is this book, Heart of New York, is this a follow-up book?
It's a parallel book. We decided to run this over Christmas because it was a family Christmas get-together in New York a few years ago. And so the stories relate to our escapades in New York and compare them to my life in Calgary, Canada, where I emigrated when I was 24 years old in 1980. So I jumped backwards and forwards between the characters, people I meet in New York on this Christmas holiday, and the guys, people I met in Calgary.
Oh, I see. When was this Christmas holiday?
It's about 5 years ago.
Okay, so you were just there for a visit, basically?
Yeah, we were there for 2 weeks in New York over Christmas. And
you had enough information for 2 weeks to write a book about it?
Oh, absolutely. Now, bear in mind that I'm very lazy. Please don't tell any of your listeners about this. But I always write a maximum of 12 chapters, and each chapter is a short story. So if you don't like one chapter, you can move on to the next one. But if you read the whole book, the chapters kind of fit into place as a book. So it's entirely up to you. And most of my books are all, the New York book itself, I really threw it myself as a challenge. I just finished writing a book about summer spent on the island of Cyprus in the Mediterranean, and it was called Chasing Aphrodite. And I loved the island, I loved the people, and it was a joy to write. So when I finished writing it, and I did get very good reviews wherever the book went, I said to myself, well, it's okay. It's one thing writing about something that you love. If you're a real writer, why don't you go ahead and write a book on a subject that you just don't like? And if you can survive and write a book, then obviously you are a writer. And so I went back to myself and I said, well, what's the worst thing that's happened to me in my travels? And unfortunately, it happened to be New York. Now, at Christmas time. First of all, every Christmas, I take my family of 4, 2 boys, my wife, to the Bahamas. And we spend the summer there. Calgary is even worse as far as weather goes than New York in winter. So it's always a fantastic change to go to the Bahamas and just idle away on sand and beach. And so that's what we were doing. Now, at that time, my youngest son was a rapper, and he wanted us to go to Harlem. So his whole thing was to persuade the family that instead of going to boring Bahamas, why don't we go to New York in midwinter and have our skin peeled off by the strong Atlantic salty winds? And they somehow agreed to this. And so we ended up as a grumpy father accompanying his family to New York and living in the heart of New York and exploring the city, and at the same time finding a lot of things within that city that brought back memories of my past living in Calgary, Canada. So a lot of I would have, just interrupt me if you've got any further questions. But I had about 15 friends of mine whom, as I wrote a chapter, I would send it to. They all loved this Aphrodite book. And when they saw my chapter by chapter, they complained no end. They said, why are you writing about the cold, miserable weather, about a place that you don't like, and then you're comparing to something as boring as Calgary? They were Calgarians, by the way. And one day, I received a call from one of them. And he complained no end on the phone for about half an hour about one particular character called Joe. And I said to him, Rick, you spent half an hour talking about this character that you didn't like called Joe. Why are you wasting my time discussing this for half an hour with me when you say you don't like the book, you don't like the story, and you don't like the character? It finally dropped. As I went through chapter by chapter, halfway through the book, the penny dropped, and these guys realized that this wasn't just another very friendly, amusing travelogue about a sunny place. Because I was in New York and it was cold and it was miserable in winter, the stories I wrote were all about gray areas in life, and you put into circumstances, and what's your moral stance on this? Would you do this? Would you take that action? Would you take this? As soon as they understood it, they began to love the book. So the book itself is really a matter of parables. It's giving you a story, and it's showing you how other people reacted to that story. But it leaves you asking yourself what you would do in that story. And I think that almost no matter how sad the story is or dark the stories are, there is always a light at the end of it. There's always that if someone has got so many problems in his life, and you read that book, and you'll see that there is always a solution to those problems, or there is a direction that you can turn in a different direction towards finding happiness or finding fulfillment. And those were what the stories were about. And the miserable weather, at Christmas time, really inspired me to write these kind of stories. One thing I did discover was, as miserable and unhappy I was to go to New York as opposed to the Bahamas, was that I fell in love with the people. I've been to New York many, many years ago. I found, when I was much, much younger, and I found the energy electric. But most of the people were rushing from one place to another. They really didn't seem, at my first trip, they really didn't seem to be any form of generosity or caring for visitors, most probably because the city is inundated with visitors and people get fed up with them. But what I found here was that every corner I went to ask for help, those gruff-looking people or sounding people actually went out of their way to help us time and time again in finding directions, finding certain landmarks, and so on. And the hotel was absolutely hospitable and really catered to every need that we had. So at the end of the day, I really missed New York when I left it.
Well, so what sort of things did you do for the 2 weeks that you were there?
Well, for instance, my wife is Roman Catholic. So one of the things she wanted to see was St. Patrick's Cathedral. Now, it was sleeting like hell. We could hardly see where we were going. We had baseball caps on our heads just to make sure that we could keep the rain from our eyes. And we look at our map for a guidance, and this St. Patrick's Cathedral is supposed to be in this one particular place. There's a fellow sitting on two sets of wooden planks. You know where you stock boxes on, and then you have something that moves those along. What's called the plaques? It's not plaques, but anyway, that's what it was. So you had this guy sitting on the street, totally covered, and he was sitting on two of these planks or whatever they were to keep himself from the rain, cross-legged, and he was selling postcards. So we went to him, and I expected him to start selling us stuff, which he never did. And I said, so where is St. Patrick's Cathedral? So he pointed the way. It was right in front of him on the same side of the street. And we were so disappointed because everything was scaffolded. They were in the middle of doing a $70 million renovation. So this beautiful cathedral that hosted the funerals of presidents and famous people and so on was just covered in these trestles. So we went in, we found a side door that we could get into, and it was in the evening, and everything was dark. Lights weren't on. And we wondered, what were we doing in a place such as this? And then, when I looked at it, I went back to a 4 o'clock morning Muslim religious service in Calgary. And I compared that religious service and the Muslims there and how they did their servicing compared to what the cathedral itself gave us the impression of. So that was one thing as well. So those are the kind of things going on. It's always looking at images and they're reminding you of something else. I went for a walk one day I left my kids and my family at home and they were sleeping in the morning. And I went for a walk in Central Park. And one of the things I was looking for was John Lennon's they said that there was a memorial to John Lennon.
Oh, yeah, it's called Strawberry Fields. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
And it wasn't a statue. It was a 9-meter diameter mosaic on the floor with John Lennon on there. And so that's what it was. So going back to this little tribute to John Lennon, it reminded me of a trip I took with my family to Liverpool and hiring a taxi cab that took us around to all the jaunts that the Beatles used to go to. So again, it's going backwards and forwards to the reminders of this. I then ended up with losing my kids and my wife, and then finding them in front of a 9-foot-tall Alice in Wonderland. And I thought to myself, you're always surprised by what the Americans think are important or not. I couldn't see any statues to famous people in the park. I saw this 9-foot thing deal with John Lennon. And then all of a sudden I come across this brass statue of Alice in Wonderland surrounded by the rabbit and a bunch of other people and kids jumping up and down trying to climb it. A lot of the polish had gone off the statues because they were always being climbed on. And so there's always these juxtapositions of what you see and what your life has been. And you just compare the two. My family wanted to go to see the Statue of Liberty. We booked, and then because the weather was so rough, we weren't able to get any transport. We weren't able to get a ferry across. So they all decided that they were going to take a picture of this of the statue. Well, the statue is pretty small. If you get closer and closer to it, it's not as large as you always imagined it to be. By the time we took a picture and our selfie of all of us sitting there, you saw the four of us in front of the Statue of Liberty. All you could see was the blooming torch, the way she's holding the torch up between the shoulders of two of us. And again, I looked at that and felt really sad about it. One of the highlights in New York was when we got lost and we came across the site of the World Trade Center.
Oh, the memorial.
The memorial.
Yeah.
You're busy where everywhere you go, there's a great deal of business. There's a great deal of energy in that place. Here was absolute peace. It was surrounded by these, I believe they were white oak trees or something. And you go in there and suddenly everything is so peaceful. And you walk to this place, to this wall, which is about 3 foot high. And as you approach it, you look down into it and you see a huge square and water is seeping very gently down a slope into the center and then disappearing into a void. And again, it brought back so much tenderness for what had happened on that day, on September the 11th. And then I went back to what I actually did on September the 11th and where I was. I was meeting a client in Calgary on that day, and it was around 8 o'clock in the morning in Calgary. And I was meeting a place called Humpty's. And as I got into the breakfast place, virtually everybody in that restaurant were crowded around one television set. And this television set was of this repeated action of this blooming tower being knocked out. And I thought, why are they sitting around watching a movie? Then the next thing I saw was the president who was sitting on a kid's chair trying to read a fairy tale to kids who had disappeared.
Yeah.
And so,
we've got just about a minute left. So can you wrap it up with the book? Has the book been released?
The book has been released, and it's part of our Christmas drive. So you can get it on emilrem.ca.
Okay. That's what I was going to ask you. All right. And when was it released?
It was released again for this Christmas. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show, and best of luck with the book. I hope it does well.
Well, and thank you so much for your time.